Hello and welcome to the aForm Show, the premier podcast for all things architecture and design across the MENA region. Welcome to your tribe. Hello and welcome to the show, everyone. Today's guest is Atousa Aslaminezhad, Assistant Professor at School of Energy, Geoscience, Infrastructure and Society, aka Aegis, at the Heriot-Watt University of Dubai. Her work explores the intersection of sustainability, infrastructure, and the built environment, bringing a research-driven perspective to the challenges shaping the future of our cities and buildings. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Atousa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Awesome. So as a listener of the show, you must have seen that we tend to refer to academia a lot, and we say, if only students knew this, and if only academia did this, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. So now that we have academia with us on this episode, I want to start off with, obviously, fresh graduates. When I say fresh graduates, I'm talking about, of course, architects, but then designers in general. How and what are you guys doing today in 2026 that is sort of preparing graduates for industry?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I believe architectural education is going through a very important transition. So traditionally, you may have architecture students coming up with an idea, develop that idea, draw it, model it, render it, and present it for getting feedback. And this goes as a loop, right? But nowadays, I think these are still fundamental skills for any architecture student that needs to go through. But I believe today's architecture discipline is becoming much more complex in a way that there are so many other things other than the design principles that a student is going through, such as environmental conditions, new materials, new construction techniques. AI is increasingly coming into our discipline, whether we like it or not. So I think that needs to be something as a benchmark for all the students to have an additional skill set other than the design fundamental skills. So I'll give you an example in my own teaching. For the past 5 years, almost, I'm teaching in year one design studios where I'm receiving the fresh graduates of high school.
Molding the minds of fresh graduates.
Yeah, you would say that. So basically, they're coming fresh with great ideas. And I believe that those kind of manual drawings is very important for year one. That's why in Heriot-Watt, we are actually starting year one only with manual drawings. So there is no use of computer, and they begin to learn those digital tools from the second year of architecture. So we always start from observation, because a good architect needs to observe first, understand the thing, analyze it,
right,
and then come up with the ideas and all. So I think in the studios, observation, those kind of hands-on experiences with model making, drawing, making mistakes is something which is very important. And at the same time, especially when you're talking about the graduates after 3-4 years, it's very important to have that kind of a balance between manual and digital, because we're actually in the era of technological tools. So I think it would be nice to have a good combination of both together, the manual thinking, because that's the way that you observe and then you draw with your hand, and that's how you're developing an idea. So if they know and if they learn how to use their own skills and develop an idea, they can easily go ahead and use, let's say, softwares. So I don't think we need to teach them multiple software, because every day we have lots of updates, right? But it's about how to think and how to be able to use those kind of technological advancements with a very good basic knowledge of architecture.
Gotcha. I think for a lot of the industry folk who are listening, again, people who are sort of maybe in the position of hiring fresh graduates now. And as much as I hate this term, because as a graduate myself of the region, as are you, I guess the general narrative that a lot of studios have about graduates from this region is that, they don't really know much, or they're really lacking in the fundamentals, or they're really lacking in basic spatial planning. Sure, they might be able to do a fantastic render. They might be able to put, a great InDesign presentation together, but the fundamentals are missing. So I'm curious from your point of view, you touched upon manual drawing and manual drafting and so on, but is there any specific special attention given to basic things like spatial planning? Is there a specific sort of course that students are now doing or anything specific for this?
I think most of our courses, basically the core courses that we have are the studios. So the studio is a double credit hour course in each semester. And I always say to the students that the studio is your second home. So
your
that's
first home.
Well,
your
they don't
actual
sleep.
home is your second home.
They don't sleep in the studio. So for us, it's more important how the process is being done rather than the final end result. We are looking into that kind of learning curve through the process of the design. So how a sketch, a very simple sketch, becomes a model, and then how that model becomes a project. So our semesters are quite short. They're just 12 weeks per semester, but I would say they're very intense because we really focus on the process of the project. How does it evolve from a very initial idea to a project? And I believe that is actually the strength of the program that any student is going through, because they learn by doing.
Right. Okay. So something that I wanted to touch upon as well is you did mention it briefly earlier with AI and so on. I'm of the opinion that as an architect or as a designer, the basics have never really been challenged in terms of your process. So for example, if you go multiple decades back, you had manual drafting, sure, and you would actually have to, draw an axonometric or whatever to show your 3D model. Come the advancement of CAD and even eventually BIM, you still had to some extent actually model walls and render your model and so on. But with AI now, it feels like you're sort of shortcutting all of that and reaching the end, which I suppose has its benefit. But for a student who's studying the fundamentals, how does AI fit into that? Does it fit into it? And more importantly, as faculty, how do you guys deal with it? Because it is a reality, unfortunately, or fortunately today, it is.
Yeah, I think AI itself is, as you mentioned, is part of our life these days, especially with the new generation that they basically know how to use it better than us, right? So I don't think it should replace the learning process, but rather it should become part of the learning environment.
Right.
So yeah, true. AI assisted tools may give you more options in very less time. It's becoming more iterative, I would say, as a design process using AI tools. But at the same time, you still need an architect, a skilled architect, to judge those things, to make a judgment. I remember the first thing that I learned in architecture school was that an architect should be a decision maker. So if you can make a decision for, let's say, the brief that is given to you as an architect at the best time, with the proper budget that you have, with the request of the client, etc., you become a very good decision maker because you're leading the project. You're working on an idea to end it with a project. So I think that part of decision making or the critical thinking is the role of the architect who has to deal with the AI, let's say, proposals or options. As an architect or as a designer, you need to look at the options and say, why? Why am I choosing this option out of the 100 other options?
Right.
Am I trying to solve any problem? So I think that kind of personal judgment is the role of the designer and the architect to deal with.
Right. Okay. So then I suppose the next obvious question would be, if students and graduates are, I suppose, having access to something like AI and are able to see multiple options and multiple iterations of their designs, I would imagine that the actual research and development of their projects has significantly increased, just because they can look at so many more sun studies or, contextual studies or performance of facades, et cetera, et cetera. Like there's so many things that you can look at now. So I'm imagining that proposals that you're seeing now being developed by students are much more detailed, much more thought out. Is that fair to say?
Not necessarily all of them, because it depends also on the prompt that you're using for the generation of, let's say, an image or a diagram. So whatever detail the input is, you will get the most detailed output. I don't think AI is, as I mentioned earlier, is replacing that kind of process. It's just making it a little bit more faster. So, for example, a student could use AI to generate multiple alternatives, right? Explore different spatial possibilities, test ideas. But I think the distinction between the decision-making part and the problem-solving is very important. I think the educational sectors used to think if we should introduce AI or not in the curriculum. I believe that time has passed. That was about 5 years ago, right?
Yeah. It's kind of almost like a no-brainer now. Like you have to. Like how could you not at this point?
True. So I think now the question for us as educators is more on how do we teach AI to the students? How do we teach them to use AI more critically and more responsibly? I think we need to promote that usage of AI to the students in a way that we promote more curiosity and more active learners rather than passive learners, because that makes them more cautious about the decisions and ideas around.
Yeah, that's a difficult one, right? Like how do you foster passion? I wish passion came in like a bottle. You could just like give it to someone, be like, here you go, have some passion. But yeah, it seems to be the hardest thing to foster. So anything that you guys are doing in particular to sort of, I suppose, drive students to explore more? Or
well, for us, it's mostly about the diagramming or some renders as outputs, which doesn't really need much of reflection of the thinking of the student. It's just the representation part of it. But I think that's why in all the design studios, we are having a component of sketchbook from year one all the way to masters in Denmark.
Right.
So that sketchbook is actually a good documentation of the thinking process from week one all the way to the end of the semester.
Yeah.
So that shows the personality of the designer, the way that the person is thinking, and so on. So it's mostly about the enhancements of the output rather than the design itself.
And to be honest, it's a good habit, right? I mean, shout out to Harpreet if you're listening. But because of the kind of importance that she gives to sketching, for example, which I suppose to some extent has rubbed off on me as well, I still today maintain a sketchbook of, a random detail or something that I'm seeing or whatever. And I found that it actually helps somewhere in the subconscious to like process spaces. So yeah, definitely, I think it's not just a university thing. I think every designer should have some kind of sketchbook on them, be it digital or, manual, whatever, but somewhere to document very quickly whatever you're thinking of or seeing. Interesting. So at this point of the episode, I have 2 questions that I want to ask, right? The first one, both questions are around design gaps, right? So the first one is within academia, right? You've obviously been in the space for a while. You've studied here. You now teach here. From what you're seeing across academia in general for this region, what would you say are gaps which could improve, or things which could change, processes that could change, something that could be added on? What do you think would benefit?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is about the relationship of the academia with the industry. Because sometimes if you have a brief in the studio and then you go deep into that kind of process, you may forget about the reality, right? So that's why we are always trying to have a very strong relationship with the practitioners outside the university, inviting them to the studios, to the juries, sometimes giving a lecture or doing some workshops for the students, to keep that kind of connection for the students from the first year, from the very beginning of the journey of architecture, to actually have some ideas about how the practice is going to be, because the real life in practice is totally different than
100%.
The projects they're doing in the university. And sometimes we actually take them to the studios as a field trip or a visit just to try and see how the life of studios are in reality. So I think that connection between academia and industry, that bridging, is something which needs to be a continuous one.
Right. Well, that perfectly leads me to my second question, which was us as industry. What gaps do we have, do you think, can be filled? And I think you've sort of already answered that question.
Yeah.
But in general, I suppose, honestly, if there are studio owners or practitioners listening who are saying, you know what, I like what Atousa is saying, I think I want to do more, I think my studio should do more, what actionable steps and things could they do to bridge that gap between academia and studio?
I think sometimes universities are moving slowly because we're responsible for developing some fundamental knowledge. And, it takes time to train an architect within the short time of, let's say, 4 years,
Yep.
while industry moves much more faster. It's very quick.
True.
Because it has to respond to real conditions, the client needs, the technologies, the economic pressures. So it's all about money at the end of the day, right?
On both sides. On both sides.
But I don't think either side should try to become the other. I mean, I believe both parties are doing their best at the moment. Instead, we should create more opportunities for exchange. So, for example, industry professionals can be involved in the studios and reviews, as I mentioned earlier. And at the same time, universities can bring in research to the practice. They can bring in experimentation, critical thinking. So basically, I would say we shouldn't say that the universities are preparing the graduates for the industry, but we should also ask, is the industry preparing itself for the graduates?
It's a very good question.
Yeah.
I feel like I should answer that on behalf of the industry. And I think the answer is no. I think the answer is no, because I think the industry is just so, I mean, I can speak to architecture in the UAE, specifically Dubai. It's just so fast. And there's, I don't want to say constant deadlines, but there's always something to do, right? Like very, very rarely do you ever find a studio that's, like, oh, we have like a day to do something else today, I mean, there's always something happening. So to take time off for something like this, which is, how can we get students involved back into industry and things like that, I think, unfortunately, from a priority point of view, it probably falls like way below on the list. And maybe that needs to be put slightly higher up. Yeah, I think that's maybe what we as industry can do. I'm curious to hear about, there's a very controversial, but not controversial, but there's an opinion that doesn't really have a right answer, but I'd like to hear what you think about it. So the narrative is always, industry says students aren't prepared for industry, and academia says that we shouldn't prepare students for industry. And what I mean by that is academia says that as students, what we're trying to do is get them to have and develop a design stance of some kind, right? Graduates should be able to say, this is how I see this problem. These are the decisions I would make. And therefore, academia says that students should be pushed towards design exploration and really sort of focus on that. And then when you come to actual industry, you can sort of learn how to make those a reality. So it becomes a lot more exploratory and a lot more philosophical in academia, and it becomes a lot more reality in industry. This is what academia says our students should be doing. Industry then says, that's fine, but a graduate who did, say, a thesis on an airport is probably not going to work on designing an airport in year one when they join industry. In year one, they're probably going to work on, unfortunately, the standard sort of washroom details, staircase details, the normal things, right? Which is what every architect does. So industry is now saying, but why isn't there being enough focus given on even those kind of things as compared to design exploration? So I feel like both of them have a valid point to some extent, but I'm interested to know what you think about it.
I fully agree with what you mentioned, because I believe in university during the studio time, it's the only time for the students to explore.
Is it though? Like, that's my question. Is
the freedom of the briefs? We are trying to make it fun as much as possible, right? There are absolutely restrictions in each brief, but I'm sure when you graduate, you can't design a zero gravity house, right? But we did it.
I mean, you never know. But yes, I understand.
Not soon.
Yeah.
Unless it's a competition, right, that you participate as an industry. But we're trying to increase the level of creativity in the briefs in a way that the students are actually learning through those kind of explorations. But I think to answer the question that you mentioned, to bridge that gap between academia and what's happening in the reality in the industry, the internship programs are really helpful. So a student during the summer is taking the internship in an office, sometimes abroad, not even here in Dubai or UAE, basically. And that opens their eyes, I would say, because they actually touch the real thing. And they also have their knowledge that they've gained in the university in the back of their mind. And they're seeing how the other colleagues of the team in terms of collaboration are working on that project. And this becomes that kind of two-way exchange for the student. It's not an easy task in the beginning, but I think that challenge itself that struggle is helping them to learn and prepare themselves for practicing as an architect.
Can I ask again, then on behalf of industry, right? I mean, you don't have to give me a name or a studio or anything like that, but from the internship experiences that you've seen, what would you say is a successful internship experience? What can we as an industry do? What have you seen as an example, perhaps, where the student went into, let's say, untitled studio? What were the takeaways? What did they learn? What made the internship a success, according to you?
Yeah, I think the mentorship. The mentorship is something which is really important, because when you take the responsibility to train someone, I think that's very important to have your eye on that person, that shadowing should be there. We had so many students going through internships and they're coming back after a while and saying, oh, you know who was my mentor? The principal of the office. I'm saying, this is fantastic. You know, for them as a principal of an office, the time is really important. And I really appreciate that the person is actually investing time on training that young learner.
Yeah.
So I think that mentorship is very important, but actually the scale of the project doesn't matter. It could be, as you mentioned, a washroom detailing or a big project as a competition entry. But I think the way that the student is being guided and the people who are collaborating with that person is really making a difference in the experience.
Yeah. I think there's something I want to add on to that, right? Because I suspect there are a lot of young graduates listening to you and saying, oh, okay, so I can just email any principal of any studio and say, hey, you should mentor me because it is your quote unquote obligation.
I didn't mean that.
No, but I'm trying to make a point that I agree that it should be not necessarily a principal, but definitely senior staff, for sure, in a studio that should be doing that. But I think the key word that you used, which I liked, was actually shadowing. That's the most important, because I get the impression that when graduates go for an internship, there seems to be the notion of, all right, I'm here. What can I do? Give me stuff to do, right? And it's not so much about give me stuff to do. It's more about kind of just being in the background and seeing where you can add on and jump in, right? It's not so much that it's an obligation from the studio to sort of quote unquote teach you. It's more you sort of observing what's happening and saying, okay, they're now doing this. I don't know anything about that. I should learn. Or they're now doing this. I actually know something about that. I can actually contribute something. And I think the word shadowing is important, because I have found, at least from the interns that I've had, the best experiences actually come when they're literally shadowing me. And there are these moments where I can, break away from what's happening and then give them like a 5-minute sort of condensed, this is what we're doing, this is what's happening, da, 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 and then they can kind of, carry on. So I think shadowing is a good word to use, but I also think it needs to be balanced out with expectations. It's not practical to expect a principal to sit with you for 10 hours a day.
By the way, between brackets, the example I was talking about was a boutique scale office.
Yes.
So, but it's still appreciated.
True.
Very valuable, I believe. I think the other thing is also that kind of collaboration between the different people in the office that the student would learn from. Because in academia as well, we do have at Heriot-Watt, we have courses where we are basically bringing together students from different disciplines and programs. We have courses that architecture students are working and collaborating with architectural engineering students, with civil engineering students. So this is the moment that they're learning from each other. And I always tell to my students that the amount of learning that you gain from your friends and peers is much more than what you would learn from us.
Significant.
Yeah. And architecture as a discipline it's very much into collaboration. So I think that's also something that they should learn during the internship program, that how to collaborate and how to communicate with different parties, interior designers, structural engineers, 100%. HVAC system, and so on.
Yeah, learning how to speak the language for sure. But what I've found, or one of the reasons why this podcast exists, is actually because of an intern. And I've told the story multiple times, so I'll give you like a quick summary of it. Back in the day, I was working on a very large scale project where we had a couple of interns that came on, and the word shadowing, very key there. So I said, listen guys, just come with me. Right? Don't ask what's happening, like just roll with it for like the first week, right? So what I was able to do was take them for, board level meetings, site visits, vendor visits, etc., workshops internally and so on. And of course, I was kind of explaining, this is why we're doing it, this is why we're doing this. And sort of through this entire process, they then got it. They're like, okay, we get what we have to do. And by the end of the 4 months, 6 months, whatever the internship period was, one of them comes to me and says, you know what's cool? I didn't realize that after graduating as an architect, I don't have to work as an architect. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, no, because like in my mind, I thought that, I'm studying architecture. I'll graduate. I'll get an architecture degree. I will apply for a position that says architect or junior architect. And I will forever work as an architect until the day I die. And I was like, yeah, that's not the case. He's like, yeah, I know. I know now it's not the case because I didn't realize that architects could also be project managers, design managers. I didn't realize I can take my architecture degree and I can do a master's in signage, wayfinding, etc., etc. And I would have only known this after maybe 5 years, 10 years in the industry. And by that time, I've already lost so much time. And now I can make an informed decision about which sort of field I want to get into or whether I want to stay as an architect. Also, that's also fine. And he said the only reason why he knew that was because of the internship. And he's like, there are many of my other colleagues who have not done this internship and therefore will not have this information until either we share it in some way or they ask me. So it's very likely that they will never find this out. And if only there was some way to document this experience and these learnings in a public, easily available manner, it would be awesome for everyone. That's one of the core reasons why this podcast even started. Because when I heard that, I was like, yeah, you know what? You're right. You're absolutely right. There must be some way for people to exchange and learn, from each other without having to, go to a networking event and, tap someone on the shoulder and be like, hi, excuse me, can I ask you a question? So yeah, big fan of internships is what I'm trying to say with that long story.
Right.
So as we sort of reach the end of the episode, I guess this is typically where I like to look forward, right? We've sort of discussed where the industry is, where academia is now. We've discussed what could change, what should change. I'm curious to hear from you what the future looks like for design education. In your opinion, are we headed towards more intense programs? Are we headed towards more philosophical design programs? Where do you think academia is going to go with it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think we are entering to a very interesting period of architecture, especially there might be some sort of uncertainty, particularly around AI, the use of technology, and the way that the profession is changing. But I'm actually quite optimistic because I don't think technology makes architecture less human. And I think it gives us an opportunity to rethink what being an architect actually means. If machines can help us to produce faster, let them produce. If they're helping us to simulate
multiple
better,
options,
let them do it, right? But I think for us as humans, asking better questions, understanding the people, understanding the place, making those kind of judgments is the key, especially as we move forward to the future. That would be my kind of answer to this. And for me, that is really what architectural education should be preparing students for, right? So not simply a particular profession, which is existing today, but also the ability to shape the profession as it evolves.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I've just had a thought now, right? Do you think, because again, we're talking about bridging the gap between academia and industry, right? For lack of a better metaphor, do you think a better bridge is institutions such as RIBA, AIA, etc.? Do you think they are a better bridge between academia and industry? Because technically they are involved in both to an extent, because obviously you have your part one, part two, part threes, and then, well, I suppose part one and part two only, right? And then part three is kind of after you're in industry.
Yes.
And then even after that, you have your CPDs and things which you have to maintain. So they seem to be like an entity which is involved across both effectively. So do you think there needs to be more done by them perhaps also, or not really?
I think they're actually doing good work because we talked about that kind of two-way exchange, right, between the industry and the academia. And they're doing their best, I believe, because they're doing some events. We have the Young Architects competition every year happening in Dubai Design Week. So I think those moments are key moments that the students and sometimes the graduates are connecting with real people and during those kind of events which are happening. And that's the moment that they're stepping out from the university, from the campus, and meeting new people, creating that kind of networking channels for them. And I remember I had one professor, a German professor in professional practice, and he was talking about architecture is all about networking.
He's not wrong. He's not
I really
wrong.
agree. Now I understand, after maybe 10 years, I understand what he means by that, because it's about, us as people are like the dots. So if you start connecting those dots, you'll get a wider and wider network.
Yeah. And it also, I mean, of course, it'll help you with your career, but then fundamentally, isn't that how you get work as well to an extent, right?
One of the ways, I would say.
I mean, I would say for a region like Dubai, it's probably the best way.
True.
And the most reliable way, I would say also, is basically who you know and who's in your network. So yeah, it's a good skill. Are you guys going to teach that at Heriot-Watt somehow? Be like, all right, guys, this is how you network.
We do have a course, professional practice, which is preparing the students for the industry. Yeah.
Cool. All right, Atousa, we can obviously keep chatting about academia and industry, but I think we've touched upon some very good points. Hopefully, if there are industry leaders, I would say, listening in, any time that you can donate towards academia will help. Although you may not see the instant result of it, it helps. I'm a strong believer of the rising tide raises all boats, not just your boat. So the more we sort of give back as a collective, the better it'll be for all of us as a collective. And conversely, I think if there are young graduates listening in, you've heard a lot about how the industry probably operates. And I think it's now up to you to find your way through this crazy scene of design that we have over here. As part of the closing tradition on the show, we have the aForm tradition, which is basically a question that's been asked by one of our previous guests to the next guest, not knowing who they are. You don't know who asked the question. The person who asked the question doesn't know who's going to receive the question.
Wow.
And to be honest, like I mentioned before the episode started, I myself don't know what the question is until just now.
Okay.
So let's see. Let's see what you get. Sometimes these are a bit of fun and sometimes they're kind of silly as well. So, okay. Here you go. So the question that you have for you is, what is the project or place or experience that quietly changed the way that you see design? So what is the project or a place or an experience that quietly changed the way that you see design?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question.
This is where we can take a break, get a coffee, think about your answer, and then come back.
I prefer to finish it.
So it's a project, a place, or an experience, something which quietly influenced how you see design.
Yeah, I think the experiential part of architecture is something which is very essential. How to create a memorable space that a visitor would basically remember that, even if they visited for once. You know, us as humans, we are inhabiting in spaces most of the time, right? We are sheltering. So if you're thinking about the old days, the meaning of habitat was about to have a shelter. So I think how to develop that shelter for the human experience is something which is very important. And how do you deal with the colors? How do you deal with the amount of light which is coming to the project? How sometimes you remember a space from the smell of it, right?
True.
So I think that kind of multisensory sort of experiential side of architecture is something which is making it more memorable, whether it's a small project to a very large one.
Yeah. Interesting. Now that I think of it, yeah, that's probably what, well, not my answer was going to be, but but I understand what you mean. Yeah, I'm just thinking for me, what is the, I mean, I can think of two and for very similar reasons. So I remember the first time I was kind of, I suppose, mesmerized was the Barcelona Pavilion. Mies, I think, was, and I think what stood out to me was two things. Number one was I had gone with a bunch of interior designers. They didn't get it because they're like, what's the big deal? It's like travertine floors, 2 chairs, like what's the big issue here?
Some planes.
And I was like, you don't understand. So I think that was definitely one where I think by not doing much, you did a lot with that space.
Less is more.
literally less is more. And then I think the next one, which kind of stands out to me now, is probably the House of Wisdom. And I think for very similar reasons, right? I mean, clearly I like contemporary architecture, obviously, but I think in both scenarios, what I liked about both projects was the whole project was very cohesive. So the landscape spoke with the architecture spoke with the interiors spoke with everything else around it.
Detailing and finishes.
Yeah. Like you could say that it was one person or one design team pretty much through the entire process across all the disciplines. Because you could see why certain decisions were taken, why the landscape did this and why the roof cantilevered here and why, this was glass and this was solid. It was all done for a very clear reason. So I think for me, those two projects kind of showed what architecture can truly be if everyone works together towards this sort of one design vision. Yeah.
And I personally don't think a new or an iconic or a spectacular architecture is the valuable one. Sometimes you visit a project which is an adaptive reuse project and you say, wow, this is amazing what they've done. That they maintain this much of the project and they've done this much. So I think it's about, as you mentioned, about the way that the architect is thinking through and the team is coming up with the idea from A to Z of the project and delivering it to make that memorable space for the user.
Gotcha. Yeah. Tricky question to the person who asked it, but thank you for asking it nonetheless. All right. On that note, Atousa, I want to thank you for coming on the show. The show is only possible, I say it a million times, the show is only possible because of people like yourself coming on and sharing your insights, and hopefully someone listening will take some action and it becomes a better world for all of us.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And for the rest of you guys, we will catch you guys next week. Fellow aFormer, thank you so much for your time. If this episode added any value to you, please share it with anyone who may benefit. If you want to carry on the discussion, please get in touch with us over socials. We are at aForm Show on the gram and hello@aform.studio on email. That is at aForm Show on the gram and hello@aform.studio on email. Until next time, stay inspired.